Welcome to the Greenfield Report with Henry R. Greenfield, your gateway to understanding today's geopolitical landscape. With 50 years of experience across 10 countries, Henry shares expert insights on world affairs, offering practical solutions and engaging guest perspectives. Dive into the Greenfield Report for lively discussions on the issues that matter.
This is Henry R. Greenfield. You are about to listen to a special report from a renowned expert on nuclear proliferation, and specifically on the long, tortured history of nuclear development and the international community with Iran. It is well worth the listen, and I recommend that you bookmark, download the transcript, and save it as a reference for the future. But first, a word on what is this all about as Trump ramps up his Gulf of Arabia and Middle East strategies, taking it to the next level. Trump has just gotten off the plane at The Hague for the NATO summit, which is already being pre-hailed as the most consequential since the fall of the wall, and subsequently, of course, the Soviet Union, which Putin has laments to this very day, and of course, is the basis for his invasions of anyone around him that used to be part of the Soviet Empire, most notably Ukraine. Trump will be triumphant, and the U.S. will further its withdrawal from Europe. The Europeans, noting the power shift, will agree not only just to 2.5% of GDP for their defense spending, and by the way, don't forget, most of the countries, with Poland as possible exception at 4%, most of the countries in NATO are not even close to the 2.5 and have only reached that recently under the pushing by Biden, who pushed it up to 23 countries. However, now we are going all the way up to 5% of GDP, and the Europeans will agree to that, which is far beyond, by the way, the United States, which is at about 3% of GDP for defense spending. Well, why is that? Because Europe is terrified Trump will turn his back on them, and he most certainly will. But they wish to slow it down as they must, as they are not ready yet. And there will be no solution on Ukraine, which will be left to twist in the wind for now. Because no one in the media, by the way, gets it, that the center of money and oil has permanently shifted to the Gulf of Arabia and the Middle East. With Iran on the road to regime change, regardless of what they say, by the way, and also regardless of the damage at the 3 nuclear sites, Iran will give in and pledge to never have a nuclear bomb. That means they will get invited back to the table, without the Ayatollah, of course. Trump will offer Iran deals, as only Trump can do. He will get Saudi to recognize Israel, by the way, as will other Arab nations, completing that process from the Abraham Accords. Money and power will flow into the region. If you think they got a lot of it now, it's going to be an incredible amount more. Trump has already aligned himself and his family with making billions and billions, then moving it to hundreds of billions on untraceable money, as the only controls are with Prince MBS and the Emirati and soon to be the Iranians say it is. And don't forget, it's going to also be one of the main places in the world for cryptocurrency, with the brand new 10 square mile AI data center pumping it away out there in the Saudi desert. Israel will become the de facto policeman for the region, augmented by the United States Navy in particular, and Trump will move more men and material and logistics from Europe to the Gulf region as it becomes, again, the center of the globe. The fact that no one is reporting on this seismic shift, which we have been harping on forever, is for us astounding, and is right there in front of everyone. We can no longer, however, care if the media gets it or not. I have concluded that they are in it so deep, it is now more a matter of who can describe the detail on Fordow or U.S. bases than the obvious that the center of the world is shifting. Which is power has shifted away from China. That's right. China is no longer number one on the U.S. list, by the way, of priorities for Trump. It's, of course, away from Russia, which keeps losing everywhere. All of their surrogates, such as Syria, have lost, and most pointedly, away from Europe and the democracies. Once you understand that, and the fact that Trump has zero morals and scruples, and by the way, he lauds that, and it is only about money and his quest not only to be the most powerful man in the world, but now add to that, backed by money and oil, and the Israelis, the richest man in the world, it is with incredible irony that he talks about God is on his side. But hey, that's another one for the MAGA crowd. They love to hear it. And don't forget, he just took down the current richest man in the world, Elon Musk, down about $100 billion in net worth in just 4 months. He has the MAGA crowd all pumped up about deportations, when everyone knows a guest worker program, which we have gone into on and on and on, is the answer. But no one is listening. Trump is not a fool. He owns the greatest and most powerful military in the history of the world. And by the way, if you don't take that from me, he tells you that every single day. And he just demonstrated what a small taste of it can do with the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities. No one is going to challenge him. Not even the Chinese. With the Israeli Mossad and friends, he doesn't even need his own people like Tulsi Gabbard. When she made him unhappy, she's out and not on the team anymore. Mercenaries, former enemies, now becoming frenemies. The golden age of Trump means he wins no matter what. And all roads lead through the Gulf and the Middle East. Even the Supreme Court of the United States is being super cooperative, saying he can ship his exiles and immigrants to any country, not their host country, and hot on that list is Libya, which can use some cash. How about those guys that designed the El Salvador prison? Just bring them over and make a brand new one out in the middle of the desert. Trump could put a few thousand in there, including American citizens. And no one will do anything about it because the Supreme Court has said it's legal. We have also noted time and again that Trump has consistently lost against the democracies on everything from tariffs to any other type of policy. He's also lost, obviously, to China on tariffs and Russia, and Putin has thumbed his nose at him, just to name a few, and he has no peace anywhere. Well, let's look at what's going on in Gaza. Certainly, we're not going to be putting up any hotels soon, as they still haven't found a homeland for over 2 million people. And in the interim, unfortunately, Bibi Netanyahu just keeps killing a few more every day. But the tide is turning in Trump's favor, and his years of shoring up and building up his friends in the Middle East, as we again report on over and over, are paying off. And if you're wondering, what about the Democrats? Well, let's talk about their trend and which direction they're going. Yesterday, with the strong backing of AOC, they elected a 33-year-old self-proclaimed socialist, Muslim, pro-Palestinian as the Democratic candidate for mayor in New York, who is focused on giveaways for everything from free buses and, of course, raising taxes on everyone, including corporate and any other person who has a full-time job, especially, as he calls them, the rich. Who do you think is going to win on that one? Well, good luck, Democrats. Meanwhile, Trump is lapping you in the Gulf and soon the world, while you argue about the past, and as a good friend of mine put it, live in a fantasy world. And now on with the show. This is Henry R. Greenfield with a special report today as we bring back Mark Finaud, whose expertise in nuclear proliferation and controls specific to the JCPOA, as well as his decades in diplomacy, makes him the ideal person to help us unravel the latest on what is clearly now a war between at least 3 parties. First, however, let us look at some background to catch us all up. It was the Israelis who attacked Iran after years of being tormented by Iran's various proxies in the region, most notably Hamas, and the horrific attack on October 7th, 2023. Then, of course, there was Hezbollah and the infamous exploding pagers, followed by the United States attacking, or let's say counterattacking, the Houthis out in the Persian Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz, leading to the Suez Canal, the lifeline for Europe and everything from oil from the Middle East to goods from Asia, especially China. By the way, let's talk about just for a moment before we get going, the wild card is China's dependence on the Straits of Hormuz, as they receive up to 40% of their daily oil use via that very narrow passage, with 5.4 million barrels a day heading to China, along with another 15 million barrels to Europe and the rest of the world. But back to our story. Should we not forget to mention the various militias and then Syria and what is the common thread in all of these over the last few months? Well, Israel has one by one, with the assistance of the United States, wiped them out or seriously degraded their potential to hurt Israel in any meaningful way. Thus, when Israel said it was time to hit Iran with the long-awaited attack on various senior military and nuclear officials with drones smuggled in, as well as an aerial and missile bombardment, it was a moment that President Donald J. Trump, the self-proclaimed man of peace, who one day was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Pakistan, who instantly took it back the next day after, well, let's call it like it is. He couldn't pass up the wide open skies over Iran through the most ambitious use of B-2 bombers and their bunker busters in history. These one-of-a-kind 30,000-pound bombs appeared to have all but taken out all three Iranian nuclear installations, including the infamous mountain known as Fordow. So welcome back, Mark. I hope you can help us figure out what is going to happen next as the world holds its breath at the pace and scope of this conflict.
Hello, Bob, and thank you again for the kind invitation. You outline, of course, this complex issue, perhaps to make it easier for your listeners to understand the current situation. And of course, I don't have the ambition of predicting the future, because we are in this phase of complete uncertainty. But it's important to understand the current situation by looking back at history, and perhaps even before doing so, people probably need some sort of technical background. And I found this when I am regularly interviewed or I hear other so-called experts speak on this issue. There's a lack of basic understanding of the technical aspects. So let me just recall how we make a nuclear bomb. A nuclear explosive device needs, there are two paths, and historically they've been followed. One is the uranium path. That means that you need to produce sufficient quantity of so-called fissile material, which means that this material, these atoms can be separated by being bombarded with neutrons. So that's the sort of basic type of actually atomic bomb that was manufactured by the United States, tested in 1945 and used against Hiroshima. Sort of fairly simple system that uses fission, so separation of atoms, producing, of course, huge explosion, heat, blasts, and of course radioactivity. Now, the other path is plutonium. Now, plutonium, contrary to uranium, is not something that you find in nature. It's not a mineral. It's the result of a chemical process, which can be obtained by reprocessing uranium and extracting this substance called plutonium, and then you can use it to make a plutonium bomb of the type that was used by the US against Nagasaki. So you had the uranium bomb and then the plutonium bomb. Now, of course, they cause both, a lot of damage, but let's remember that Hiroshima bomb was something like 21 kilotons, thousands of tons of equivalent TNT explosive, and Nagasaki was 21. So Hiroshima 15 kilotons, Nagasaki 21 kilotons. Now, of course, then there was a second generation beyond atomic weapons. We entered the era of hydrogen bombs or nuclear bombs that actually were based on a combination of the fission used in uranium bombs and the separation, the fusion, that's meaning a concentration that can be done by a plutonium bomb. So by combining both, you had a sort of two-stage reaction, first fission and then fusion, and the result is a much more powerful explosion. And that's why we talk about this generation of nuclear weapons of hundreds of kilotons, if not megatons, millions of tons of explosive. Now, to come back to the Iranian file, the Iranian issue case, interestingly enough, and most people probably in the United States don't know this, is that the first country that assisted Iran to establish its nuclear program was the United States. Back in the 50s, when Iran, under the Shah, was, of course, an ally of the United States as part of the containment of the Soviet Union. And by the way, it was also an ally of Israel and Turkey. You had the three non-Arab countries in the Middle East joining forces against Arab countries. So, 1957, the United States provides a research reactor to Iran, which requires high enriched uranium. So, what's the difference between low enriched and high enriched? We consider the experts consider that below 5% of enrichment, you are in the category of low enriched uranium. If you move towards 20%, you're in the category of high enriched uranium, and then you can go up to 90%, which is called a weapons grade level. Now, enrichment, what does this mean? Most people, hear this term hundreds of times per day, but they don't have the slightest idea what it means physically. So, because natural uranium contains only a very small quantity, less than 1% of the isotope needed for a nuclear explosion, which is called uranium-235. If you want to concentrate this type of isotope, there are several techniques, but the most widely used is centrifuges. So you first convert the uranium ore into a gas form, and then this gas is introduced in these cylinders that spin very quickly, and by the laws of physics, manage to concentrate the content of uranium-235. And so by then adding the result of this operation from all these centrifuges, and by the way, at one stage, Iran had 12,000 of these. So you can imagine the result, the production, the stockpile that you get, which the more you have, of course, can help you to move the amount of high enriched uranium from 5 to 20 to 60 to 90%. So that's why it's important to concentrate, to control both the level of enrichment, and this is what the 2015 agreement, JCPOA, did, and also the stockpile, the result, because the more stockpile you have, the more you can process towards the most weapons grade level. So
okay, so Mark, if we take it there to 2015, okay, which I think that's what you're moving towards here. So you believe that in 2015, the JCPOA actually would have accomplished what you're saying, which is to limit the enrichment levels to make sure that it was only used for civilian purposes, or did it not? Because there's a lot of controversy around that. That did Trump make a mistake by pulling out in 2018, or should he have just let this go because the enrichment levels would have never gotten there? What is your view on that?
yes, again, to understand this agreement, you have to go back a little bit in history, because it started at a very important, interesting juncture in 2003, after the invasion of Iraq by the United States. And by the way, you remember that one of the reasons or pretext for invasion was that Iran had weapons of mass destruction. And this turned out to be false, because this program had been already dismantled by the United Nations. But in any case, this is important to understand the Iranian approach to this. There has been evidence that they started being interested in nuclear weapons in terms of research, technology, but because Saddam Hussein, who was their arch enemy, and the main reason why they were afraid of nuclear weapons, they were not so afraid of Israeli nuclear weapons, but they were mostly concerned with their neighbors.
And we need to note why, because they fought a war. Saddam Hussein, so and they share a common border. Unlike Israel, there's no common border. So
they had this war for 8 years, and they were attacked with chemical weapons by Saddam Hussein. So they had a very bad memory of this relationship, and therefore they thought that perhaps if they did what Saddam Hussein was preparing to do, to build up a nuclear weapons program, then perhaps they would feel safer. Now, after the defeat of Saddam Hussein, of course, they didn't see any reason anymore. So this has been confirmed again by the intelligence community, and then by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that their interest in nuclear weapons stopped in 2003. But at that time, of course, it was still uncertain, and the Europeans, the three European countries, France, UK, and Germany, were really afraid. And you remember that the EU was split about the Iraq invasion. France, Germany were opposed. UK followed Bush. And so at the same time, all EU countries were concerned about what was aired in Washington, the neoconservatives who were using this theory of
preemptive war.
spread of democracy, domino theory. After Iraq, it will be the turn of Iran. And for the Europeans, that was a major source of concern, because of course, the geographic proximity, the economic interest, and therefore they were actually rushed to Tehran to negotiate a first deal, which was confirmed then in Paris, called the Paris Agreement, where Iran agreed, because it was, of course, under international pressure, agreed to suspend any activity dealing with enrichment of uranium, just to reassure, give sign of good faith. But they said, this technology is a sort of inherent right. We've signed and ratified the Treaty on Non-Proliferation. Our supreme leader pulled out a fatwa against nuclear weapons as contrary to Islam. So we don't have any intentions, and we're ready to accept all sorts of restrictions, but we still want to be able to use this technology of uranium enrichment at a low level just for peaceful civilian purposes. Now, this agreement was followed by an enlargement of this group of negotiation because the EU felt a little bit isolated. So they convinced the US, Russia, and China to join, and that was called the P5 plus one because Germany was still part of this group. Now, they started to negotiate with a very radical position, which now you can hear some reminiscence about, which is called zero enrichment. There was so much distrust about Iran's intention that the position of the whole international community, the P5 plus one, was to say, okay, now we cannot tolerate any activity related to enrichment. And of course, that also included reprocessing of spent fuel to be able to isolate plutonium so that there is no risk of developing a nuclear weapon. Now, for Iran, that was always a red line. It was even made tougher with the election of the Armani.
A clarifying question, though, because, we're talking about Iran, and let's face it, there's other countries. North Korea has the bomb. Obviously, Israel, Pakistan has the bomb. So other countries have not necessarily been stopped from having a nuclear weapon. And so my question is to you, why has there been so much focus on Iran, especially after Saddam Hussein was taken out? Everybody came to know that that was a complete wrong assumption, and that led to a horrific war for the U.S. and for the Iraqi people. We all know Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but he did not have a nuclear weapons program. What made it so particular to Iran to focus on Iran and to say, never let them get the bomb? Is it just that the death to America and being Ayatollahs and being Shiites and whatever else you want to throw in there just made Iran really the pariah state? I'm just asking you for your opinion on this, because it seems to me that Iran, of all the countries, has been singled out to say, no, never for a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, again, it's important to go back a little bit in time. Under the Shah, as we remember that the United States supported and cooperated with Iran and even helped Iran get a nuclear program to start with. In 1974, India exploded its first nuclear device, which called Peaceful, but then was confirmed that this was a nuclear weapon. And Iran, the Shah, at that time said, well, maybe it will be a sort of a sign of being a big power in terms of status to have a nuclear weapon, even if we don't have sort of immediate enemies, more in terms of status, to be reckoned with, to be respected. But of course, the United States was not very happy with this option, and they convinced the Shah of giving it up. So the Shah made at that time a very interesting proposal. He said, okay, we're ready to give up the nuclear option, but of course we want to modernize our country, so we want to develop nuclear energy, but we don't want, if we give up nuclear weapons, we don't want anyone else in the region to have nuclear weapons. And of course, they had Israel in mind. And this is why they proposed officially to the United Nations to have the Middle East declared a nuclear weapon-free zone, as it already existed, in Latin America, and then later in South Pacific, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, and now in Central Asia. There is a whole. Actually, most of the southern hemisphere is considered nuclear weapons free, because all the countries in those regions agreed, and they signed a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. So Iran, made this proposal, which was supported immediately by Egypt, because Egypt also was frustrated of having given up its own nuclear weapons program under the U.S. pressure, and with the promise that U.S. would put pressure on Israel to follow suit, which of course never happened. So of course Israel was was on the defensive because of its policy of opacity, of not recognizing that it has nuclear weapons. So it's sort of opposed the principle, the idea, and the Egyptians actually taking into account Israeli objections that they are surrounded by hostile countries which have other weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological. Then Egypt proposed to include all these weapons of mass destruction in addition to nuclear weapons in the treaty. Now, what's interesting, of course, then Israel kept opposing that to a certain extent. Then there was a period when at the UN, the resolution in favor of this treaty was accepted by Israel. There was no vote, but there was no objection. It's called consensus. And until, maybe the early 2000s, there was this idea of building up consensus on this project. But of course, for Israel, it was always awkward because they didn't recognize having nuclear weapons. And there were attempts within the Treaty of Non-Proliferation, to which Israel is not a member, to have a conference to start discussions. And that was boycotted, that was actually vetoed by the United States at the Israeli initiative. And so then the Egyptians more recently decided to transfer this project to the United Nations General Assembly, where they have a majority and where there is no veto. So that was adopted, and that was a very clever diplomatic move. And now you have a negotiation going on every month of November for 2 weeks at the UN in New York. Arab countries plus Iran plus members of the Security Council except the United States, and of course without Israel, they negotiate a treaty. And this is supposed to happen until there is an agreement on a treaty. So let's end this parenthesis, but it explains, the approach of Iran towards nuclear weapons. And it's important to understand that this distrust towards Iran was, in a sense, matched by the distrust by Iran towards Western countries. Because what happened in 1979, the revolution, all the contracts, including a contract of enrichment of uranium in a European consortium, to which Iran had bought a share of 10%, and the contract with Germany to build the first power plant, and the supply of high enriched uranium by the United States for the research reactor, all this was stopped. And US put a lot of pressure on the other partners, China, and of course the IEA, even Argentina, that agreed to substitute the US to supply the high enriched uranium for the reactor. But Argentina, resisted this pressure. So in any case, whenever it was caught red-handed with a non-declared program that raised suspicions, Iran said, but its response to your sanctions, your isolation, we don't get the fuel we need for our research reactor, for our power plant. So we have to start indigenous production. So that was one of the first argument.
So Mark, if we look at that, I think actually you're encapsulating the entire issue here, which is this: there's a long history between the various parties, which has evolved over time. The Iran was an ally with the Shah of Israel and the United States. Obviously, thereafter, not at all. You mentioned the issue about not being allowed to carry on with their peaceful nuclear program. Obviously, the way the Americans look at it is 1979, there's the Iran hostage crisis. So there's a lot of historical trauma and anger on all sides. Okay. So if you fast forward this to what we're really talking about here today, it seems to me that Iran has missed the pivotal moment, which is really what I want to focus on, if we can, which is this. And I want to ask you why. In other words, if these guys have been so good at maneuvering various people back and forth, United Nations, with this program that you talk about in Egypt, and working together with various parties, how is it that since October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, how is it that Iran has completely every single time missed the signals? They missed the signals on the pagers with Hezbollah. They missed the signals on what Israel and Netanyahu would do. And obviously we know that Netanyahu wants to keep his job. And Netanyahu is going to keep on going, in my view. Netanyahu is going to keep on going as long as he can. And there's no one to stop them. So why is it that the Iranian, the Revolutionary Guard and the Ayatollah and all of his mullahs, how could they have missed all of this step after step after step, and now be completely, everything that you have said has now been completely blown away, and no one's paying attention at all anymore? Now they're talking about regime change. How is it that Iran missed it so badly?
Now, first, we have to go back to, again, the starting point. Why were the Europeans and to some extent US, Russia, China concerned and tried to avoid having a nuclear weapon in the hands of the Islamist regime? Well, seen from Western eyes, of course, this is a rational, non-reliable regime with, of course, a record of exporting the revolution through the proxies, building a missile program, which actually, by the way, is the direct outcome of the sanctions, because when there was cooperation between the West and Iran had a very reliable air force, which then became obsolete. And to substitute this, Iran invested in the missiles. But also, so the second concern, apart from letting such a regime have a very dangerous weapon, was also the risk of regional proliferation, of the domino theory, because it was no secret that Saudi Arabia said, if Iran gets the bomb, we get the bomb. We don't know how, because they never invested in a nuclear program. They're only starting now. Maybe because they funded the Pakistani bomb. Maybe they expected to get something in return. But also, Egypt, Turkey, etc. So the risk was, massive proliferation with, of course, all these risks of instability associated with regional conflict. So Iran, when actually it developed its nuclear program, which, again, it claimed always that it was only peaceful, always reacted because of this rivalry, this antagonism with both the United States since 1979 and Israel, in the Islamist propaganda, they called U.S. Great Satan and Israel the Small Satan. So in a sense, they were more afraid of the U.S. than of Israel. But and this is why they kept this propaganda about ending the Zionist regime, which of course is very ambiguous, but it was mostly for internal consumption and was never actually translated in an actual strategy of attacking Israel or destroying Israel. But in any case, the doctrine, the principle, the strategy of Iran when it built its nuclear program was that if it got attacked, mostly by Israel, and this happened several times in the region, like in Syria, where Hezbollah was supporting the Assad regime. You had direct confrontation between Hezbollah, supported by Iran, and Israel. And then it happened in Iraq also with the Shiite militias. And then, of course, it happened also in Iran when sabotage of facilities, targeted killings of scientists were always attributed to the Mossad, which, of course, was never confirmed. But in any case, there was a sort of history already of, say, secret war, low-key war, but then it started to escalate. And actually, whenever such events happened, there was, a sort of traditional reflex of revenge. This is cultural, I would say, in the region. And they invented the law of one eye for one eye. And in terms of image, domestically, internationally, whenever they are attacked, they feel they have to respond.
So let me just say, interrupt here to say this. That's exactly my point, which is this: that system was working. Well, obviously, from October 7th, 2023, that was not working. So my question to you is, why was there no backup plan for Iran? Did they think that they really could negotiate their way out of this with Trump? I mean, you've worked with the Iranians. What was it for them that they were not recognizing reality? That's what my question to you is, because now they are prostrate. They are not just on the back foot. They are talking about losing, everything. Why did they miss this? Was it that they are so, I don't know. What's your answer? What is your feeling?
Well, again, you have to go back to Trump's withdrawal from the JCPOA. That was a big shock, not only for Iran, but for the whole international community. The countries that had spent 12 years actually negotiating that agreement, which was based on reciprocity. And again, throughout the process of negotiation, I said initially the starting point was zero enrichment, which was not realistic. And this is when El-Baradei, the Director General of the IAEA from Egypt at that time, proposed a compromise, saying, let's allow Iran to enrich uranium at a low level, let's guarantee supply of the fuel they need, and all this will be under the control of the IAEA. But the US rejected that. Obama tried another option, which was called a fuel swap deal with Brazil and Turkey, and again that didn't work out. But in any case, the final agreement was based on reciprocity, meaning tit for tat. Iran accepts to restrict its nuclear program under very strict conditions and verification, unprecedented. No other country had accepted such an intrusive verification system. And in exchange, sanctions are lifted. So that worked for 4 years. Actually, there are 15 quarterly reports by the IAEA with inspectors on the ground, 24-hour CCTVs, etc., which said Iran did exactly what was required of it. Reducing the number of centrifuges, reducing the level of enrichment, down blending or exporting the excessive stockpile, etc. And that worked for 4 years. Then Trump came, and in spite of the quarterly certification by the IAEA that Iran was complying, Trump said, I don't care. It's not in our national interest. And this is the worst agreement, meaning it was signed by Obama. And therefore, now we reimpose sanctions. But he didn't say, what do we prefer? Mike Pompeo put 12 conditions, which, of course, none of which was realistic. Again, it was even worse than zero enrichment. And of course, there was a big shock in Iran. And I was invited by the Institute of Foreign Affairs to actually with a group of Europeans and an expert from an Arab country, because the Iranians were just at a loss. They were puzzled and they didn't know what to do. So they asked for advice. So most of us said, don't be on the defensive. You have a good record. You have been complying with the agreement. So throw the ball back into the camp of the US and Israel. So you can, maybe give more signs of goodwill, like there is this additional protocol. There was the result, again, of Saddam Hussein cheating with the IAEA, having a clandestine program. So therefore, now you have this additional protocol where the agency is allowed to inspect even undeclared facilities or activities. So this is a sign of goodwill. And Iran signed that protocol, but the parliament, which is usually more conservative, didn't ratify it. So I said, ratify the additional protocol. And by the way, they had this promise made in the JCPOA. Then there is the treaty, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, where countries, want to prevent nuclear testing. And the problem with that treaty, it was adopted in 1996. Iran signed it, Israel signed it, Egypt signed it, but none of them ratified it. Like the United States, that signed the treaty but didn't ratify. Some of the other nuclear powers like India, Pakistan, North Korea didn't sign. And therefore the treaty cannot enter into force, although it already has a verification agency. So I said, as a sign of goodwill, again, you show that you don't want nuclear weapons, you don't want to test nuclear weapons. And the cherry on the cake would be even to sign the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, to show that you don't want nuclear weapons. It's interesting to show their mentality. They responded by saying that actually the next day the foreign minister Jawad Zarif said, okay, we're ready to ratify the additional protocol if the US lifts all the sanctions, which is, of course, not balanced in diplomatic terms. So they always react in terms of, tit for tat. We've had a targeted killing. We respond by increasing the level of enrichment to 60%. And, that's how they function. And that's how they were caught in this sort of vicious circle, in this escalation that led to the current situation. And therefore, they were trapped. They didn't realize that they were going over the board, that they were, even, excuse the expression, they were facing the Europeans as well. And of course, in the meantime, Trump of course, convinced and even manipulated by Netanyahu, decided this new phase.
It's interesting also in terms of your own personal participation there. So bottom line is you're saying you provided them with a plan B, which was, okay, Trump may walk out of the JCPOA, but you gave them the plan B. They were following the plan B. And while they were continuing to support all their proxies in the region, in effect, they were not really convinced, I guess you're saying, that Israel would attack them, A, and that B, that Trump would go with the ultimate, which is obviously these 30,000 pound bunker busters. So they were not really, I guess you're saying they were not prepared for that. Is that right?
Yes, because in a sense they remained in their logic, in their bubble, saying, we respond to Trump's withdrawal by increasing the level of enrichment, etc., in the hope that either the Europeans will help us mediate, and Europeans tried their best, but of course they never convinced Trump. Under Biden, the Europeans almost reached a deal between the U.S. and Iran, but that was stopped by the war in Ukraine. So the Iranians, in a sense, were caught in their own trap. And of course, there were signs of a risk of escalation when Israel attacked the Iranian consulate in Damascus before the takeover of the revolution. I mean, they were still under Assad. That felt almost like a blow on Iranian soil, which, of course, legally speaking, is not the case. But anyway, so they decided to respond and started to attack Israeli territory. The second scale, if you like, step in the escalation was the assassination by Israel of the head of Hamas in Tehran. Targeted killing, but without collateral damage, which showed the Israeli capacity. But again, a blow to the image of Iran being a strong nation with air defense systems, etc. So again, the Iranians responded by attacking Israeli territory, and that started. Of course, they also after the U.S. had killed Soleimani in Iraq, they also attacked military bases. U.S. military bases in Iraq, but every time this was calibrated not to cause massive casualties or damage, and the same with Israel, the attacks on Israeli soil. But of course, that couldn't stop the escalation because Israel had been preparing, had been planning this attack and was waiting for the right time, right opportunity after perhaps a couple of events triggered the attack. First, the announcement that Trump was ready to negotiate with Iran, which probably was a surprise for Netanyahu. And second, the plan for a French-Saudi conference on the Palestinian state, which of course would have been very embarrassing for Israel. And yes, and then finally, the report from the IAEA that was expected because the IAEA reports regularly on the status. And in this case, the report was clear. For anyone who read this report, the conclusion was that Iran is not near any stage of manufacturing a nuclear weapon, but it has violated its obligations, its commitments in terms of notification of even past experiments that could have been suspicious. But that was really part of the phase which was concluded in 2003. So in any case, Netanyahu took this opportunity to launch this attack, with the pretext of now Israel is really now very close to a bomb.
So let me give you my view on that. Okay, so thank you for all of that explanation, which I'm sorry to say, I think now what you're talking more about is kind of historical things that people are going to write books about. But I think we're in a different world now, Mark, and that's why I want to hear your view on this, which is this. I believe that we're in a world now where people like Netanyahu has decided his way forward to remain in power is essentially to keep going. And no one is going to stop him. And he has, by far, the most effective, Secret Service spies in the world in Mossad. I think they're probably better than the United States, better than anybody. And they are diligent, they are well organized, and they've shown consistently, that's my point, consistently over the last 3 or 4 years what they can do. So now we are at the point here where we've used the bunker busters. We have, today Israel followed up with more bombs. Now they're starting to bomb prisons. They're starting to do selected targets. So here's the real question. How long can Iran hold out while there is no air defense? This is not even World War II where, the Allies could go over Germany, but they still lost a lot of planes right to the very end, right? There's not a single, not a shot was fired, they said, towards the B-2s. Israel has not lost a plane. This is worse than the 6-day war of 67 war. This is the worst wipeout that has happened by the Israelis towards anyone since the 67-year war. And then also now they've got Donald Trump. And so my question to you is, how long can they last before they have to give in? How long before they're going to have regime change? They're not ready to have sustained bombing of people in the streets. And the Israelis clearly are not going to stop. So what is the end game here?
Okay, maybe two points, maybe one more general and one specific to Israel. The general point is, as you said, we are in a different world, but it hasn't started now or even October 7th. We've had many cases in the last decades of use of force, including against civilians, massive casualties, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, of course, Iraq, etc., by the United States or Western countries, and Russia, of course, invading Ukraine with massive destruction, massive casualties of civilians. So the whole system, the international system put into place after the Second World War, the rule of law, international humanitarian law to protect civilian victims of conflict, this is, of course, being blown apart by these countries that, big powers that want to feel that they are above the law. That's a general point. And of course, Israel is part of this, as we have seen in Gaza, massive destructions, killing of children, women, destruction of hospitals. So that is a general point. So we have this sort of, confrontation between the rule of law and the rule of force, or the law of force. That's the general point. Israel also is a case in point because, I was posted as a French diplomat for 4 years in Israel. It's a fascinating country, and of course they still have this, trauma of the Holocaust, and so they live in this heritage. But at the same time, I would say there are a number of people who realize that peace cannot be achieved by force. That you need at one stage to talk to your neighbors and make your enemies become your friends. Otherwise, they will continue to attack you. So the problem, and again, I had a chance to go back to Israel precisely after the JCPOA was concluded, and it was interesting to speak with my former contacts from the security establishment, Army, Mossad, etc. And they said very clearly, and this was, of course, a private meeting, and they said very clearly, this agreement eliminates an existential threat against Israel. So that's why it's the best agreement that Israel could hope for, because thanks to this agreement, Iran will never get a nuclear weapon. Now, of course, Netanyahu was very critical of the JCPOA and convinced Trump eventually to withdraw from that agreement, but not because the agreement was considered as weak or insufficient with, sunset clauses. They didn't, use this argument. The main motive for Netanyahu was that throughout his whole career, he excluded any peace agreements with the Palestinians that would lead to a Palestinian state, because he knew that this would be the end of his career and any coalition with the right-wing parties. So therefore, to achieve this goal, this sort of negative goal to prevent a Palestinian state, he needed the perfect enemy. The best enemy he could find was Iran, and keeping, hyping the threat of Iran getting a nuclear weapon, which would mean, a dent in the Israeli monopoly on nuclear weapons in the region. So that's why he's sort of, and now you can see all these videos, compilation of many videos where Netanyahu announced to the UN, Iran is on the verge of having nuclear weapons. That was 15 years ago. Okay, so that was a constant obsession for him, and he wanted to express this.
Well, today we have been speaking with Mark Finaud, as you can see, a long-term expert on the Iran-Israel crisis, which has erupted into a massive war that has now brought in the United States of America. We've also seen that the United States, with its power, can reach anywhere into the world. This has upset and changed the equation in that part of the world where while they do not share common borders, Israel and Iran, these two enemies will continue to fight it out. We will come back to Mark in the near future and follow up on this and see, in fact, if there is regime change. And then, of course, answer the ultimate issue, which is, will and when will Iran bring back their nuclear program, and will it result in some type of dirty bomb or some other type of situation that will imperil the people of the Middle East? This is Henry R. Greenfield, thanking Mark Finaud and signing off.
Thank you for joining us on the Greenfield Report with Henry R. Greenfield. We hope today's insights into the ever-shifting geopolitical landscape have sparked your curiosity and broadened your perspective. Stay connected with us for more in-depth discussions and expert solutions. Until next time, keep exploring the world beyond the headlines.